Dying Mafia boss begs his virgin maid to spend one night with him because... The heavy curtains cast long shadows across Dante DeLuca's opulent bedroom, the setting sun painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Lena's fingers trembled as she adjusted the fresh linens, her usual efficiency hampered by the weight of Dante's dark gaze following her every move. She could feel the difference in the room's atmosphere. Gone was the intimidating man who commanded respect with just his presence. Instead, illness had carved hollow spaces in his cheeks and dimmed the dangerous glint in his eyes. Yet somehow, this made him even more threatening, like a wounded predator, unpredictable and desperate. "Come here," he commanded, his voice rougher than usual, but still carrying that edge of authority that made her pulse quicken. Lena approached his bedside cautiously, keeping her eyes lowered. The expensive Egyptian cotton sheets whispered beneath his shifting weight as he pushed himself up to sitting. Even in his weakened state, his broad shoulders and muscled frame commanded attention. "Look at me," he demanded. She raised her eyes slowly, meeting his gaze. The intensity she found there made her breath catch. His dark eyes burned with an inner fire that his illness couldn't touch, and something else, something hungry and determined that made her want to step back. Before she could retreat, his hand shot out with surprising speed, closing around her wrist. His grip was like iron, shocking in its strength despite his condition. Heat radiated from his touch, sending unwanted tingles up her arm. "Spend one night with me, Lena." His thumb traced small circles on her pulse point, making her skin prickle. "Before I die." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lena's mind reeled, her body frozen in place. She'd heard the whispers among the staff, seen the parade of doctors, but hearing him acknowledge his mortality made it real in a way that twisted her stomach into knots. His fingers tightened on her wrist when she didn't respond. "One night, that's all I'm asking." Lena found her voice, though it came out barely above a whisper. "Mr. DeLuca, I can't." "Can't?" His laugh was harsh, bitter. "Or won't?" She tried to pull away, but his grip held firm. "Please, let me go." "Do you know how many people would kill to be in your position?" His eyes narrowed, that familiar, dangerous edge creeping into his tone. "To have the attention of Dante DeLuca?" "I'm just your maid," Lena protested, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm nobody." "You're everything I want right now." His words were soft, but carried the weight of a threat. "My last wish, perhaps. Would you deny a dying man?" Shock and fear finally gave her the strength to wrench her wrist from his grasp. She stumbled back, her chest heaving with quick, shallow breaths. The space between them felt charged with electricity, dangerous and unpredictable. Turning quickly, made for the door, her legs shaking beneath her. But his voice stopped her cold before she could reach the handle. "You can't escape me, Lena. Not now." The words slithered down her spine like ice water, rooting her to the spot. There was no mistaking the threat in his tone, the reminder that she was in his world, under his control, regardless of her wishes. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Lena's heels clicked against the polished marble floors as she hurried away from Dante's bedroom, her hands trembling. The weight of his request pressed against her chest, making it hard to breathe. She couldn't believe what he'd asked of her, to spend the night with him, to give him her virginity. The very thought made her stomach twist. The mansion's hallway stretched before her, a gilded prison of luxury. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows on the deep burgundy walls, and priceless artwork stared down at her. Every piece screamed of power, of wealth, of the dark empire Dante had built. She stopped at a floor-to-ceiling window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. The city sprawled below, its lights twinkling like fallen stars. The De Luca mansion sat high above it all, isolated on its hilltop perch. A perfect vantage point for a king to survey his kingdom. Or a perfect prison. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and wide-eyed. The simple black uniform dress marked her as what she was, just a maid, someone who should be invisible in this world of power and violence. But Dante's eyes had always followed her, even before his illness. She'd felt his gaze burning into her back as she worked, pretending not to notice. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Lena's heart jumped into her throat. 2 of Dante's men appeared, their dark suits impeccable, their expressions unreadable. They moved with the fluid grace of predators, and Lena knew they'd been sent to find her. "Miss Moreno," the taller one said, his voice deceptively soft. "Mr. De Luca requests your presence in his study." It wasn't a request. Nothing in this house ever was. The walk to Dante's study felt like a march to execution. The men flanked her, their presence suffocating. The house seemed to close in around her, its opulence now feeling like chains rather than luxury. When they reached the study, the heavy wooden door swung open. The room smelled of leather and expensive cigars, the scent of power. More of Dante's men lined the walls, his most trusted enforcers. Their cold eyes followed her every move, and the message was clear. She wasn't leaving. One of them, Marco, stepped forward. His face bore a scar that ran from temple to jaw, a reminder of the violence that lurked beneath their polished exterior. "You seem confused about your position here, Miss Moreno," he said, his voice like gravel. "Let me make it simple. You belong to Mr. De Luca. This isn't a normal job you can just walk away from." Lena's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "I'm just a maid," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. A cold laugh rippled through the room. "No one is just anything in this family," Marco replied. "Mr. De Luca chose you. That makes you his. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." The reality of her situation crashed over her like an icy wave. Every exit was blocked, every window watched. The city below, with its promise of freedom, might as well have been on another planet. She was trapped in Dante's web, and she had been since the day she first stepped foot in this mansion. The evening shadows stretched across Dante's bedroom as Lena stood in the doorway, medical supplies clutched in her trembling hands. His personal doctor had left detailed instructions, but the thought of being alone with him made her pulse quicken. "Come here," Dante commanded, though his voice lacked its usual steel. He lay propped against silk pillows, his muscled frame somehow diminished against the massive bed. Lena approached cautiously, setting the supplies on the bedside table. "I need to change your bandages, Mr. De Luca." "Dante," he corrected, his dark eyes following her movements. "After everything, you can use my name." She kept her focus on arranging the gauze and antiseptic, trying to ignore how the lamplight softened his harsh features. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, the white shirt he wore partially unbuttoned to reveal previous dressings. "This might hurt," she warned, reaching for the tape securing his bandages. He didn't flinch as she worked, though she noticed his jaw tighten. The wound beneath was angry and red, a stark reminder of the attempt on his life. Her fingers moved with gentle precision, cleaning around the injury. "You have kind hands," he murmured, causing her to pause. "Strange, in this house of violence." Lena swallowed hard, continuing her work. "Someone has to be kind." A bitter laugh escaped him. "Kindness gets you killed in my world." "Yet here I am, trying to keep you alive." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Instead of anger, something like amusement flickered across his face. "Here you are." As she applied fresh bandages, she couldn't help but notice other scars marking his skin. Old wounds telling stories of survival. This man, who had built an empire on blood and fear, was as mortal as anyone else. "The doctor said you need to rest," she said, gathering the used supplies. "No meetings, no business." "Business doesn't stop because I'm weak," he growled, but there was exhaustion behind the words. "It will have to," she insisted, surprising herself with her firmness. "You can't rule an empire if you're dead." His eyes met hers, intense despite his condition. "Why do you care, little maid? Wouldn't my death free you?" The question hung heavy in the air. Lena busied herself with adjusting his pillows, buying time to steady her voice. "I took an oath to care for people, even you." "An oath," he repeated softly. "I took those too once, to family, to honor." His hand suddenly covered hers where it rested on the pillow. "You'll never understand what this empire cost me, or what I lost." His touch sent electricity through her veins, but it was the raw emotion in his voice that made her breath catch. For a moment, she saw past the facade of the ruthless Don to something more human, something wounded and real. The vulnerability in his admission hit her like a physical force, stirring emotions she'd tried hard to suppress. This wasn't the monster who had demanded her virtue. This was a man facing his own mortality, carrying weights she couldn't comprehend. The crystal chandelier tinkled softly in the evening breeze. Lena was adjusting Dante's pillows when the first gunshot shattered the silence. The sound cracked through the mansion like thunder, followed by the tinkling of broken glass. Her hands froze mid-fluff. More shots followed, closer this time. Shouts erupted from the grounds below. "Mr. DeLuca," she started, but Dante was already moving. His face, usually pale from illness, had transformed into a mask of cold fury. He threw off the blankets and swung his legs over the side of the bed. "Get me my gun," he ordered, his voice hoarse but commanding. When she hesitated, he barked, "Now!" Lena's hands trembled as she opened the bedside drawer and retrieved the sleek black pistol. The metal felt ice-cold against her palm. Dante snatched it from her, checking the magazine with practiced efficiency. His movements were precise despite his weakness. He struggled to stand, his legs shaking beneath his silk pajamas. "You need to rest," Lena protested, reaching for his arm. "Your condition—" "My condition?" he laughed darkly. "They think I'm dying, so they come for me like cowards." He gripped her shoulder, his touch both gentle and firm. "But I'm not dead yet." More gunfire erupted, closer now. The sound of breaking furniture echoed from downstairs, followed by screams. Dante's security team was engaging the intruders, but from the sounds of it, they were losing. "Stay behind me," Dante commanded, using the bedpost for support. Sweat beaded on his forehead from the effort of standing. "You can barely walk," Lena hissed, torn between fear and concern. A shadow passed their door. Dante's arm shot out, pushing her behind him. The door burst open, revealing a man in black tactical gear, his face masked.
What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The assassin raised his weapon, but Dante was faster. Despite his illness, despite his weakness, he moved like a cobra striking. 2 shots rang out in quick succession. The first caught the intruder in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second hit him square in the chest. But Dante wasn't finished. He crossed the room with surprising speed, grabbed the wounded man by the throat, and slammed him against the wall. The
assassin's mask fell away, revealing a young face twisted in pain and fear. "Who sent you?" Dante's voice was deadly quiet. When the man remained silent, Dante pressed his thumb into the bullet wound. The assassin screamed.
"The Rizzo family," he gasped. "Elena Rizzo. She said you were weak. Said it was time."
Something dark flickered across Dante's face. Without warning, he pressed his gun under the man's chin and pulled the trigger. Lena flinched as blood sprayed across the expensive wallpaper. The body slumped to the floor, leaving a crimson trail down the wall. She should have been horrified, should have run screaming from the room. Instead, she found herself frozen, watching Dante. Despite his illness, despite everything, he stood tall now, power radiating from him in waves. His eyes met hers, still burning with that deadly focus. "This is who I am, Lena," he said quietly. "This is my world. The moment you walked into this house, it became yours too." Below, the gunfire had ceased. Heavy footsteps approached, and one of Dante's men appeared in the doorway. "Boss, the perimeter is secure. We caught 2 more trying to escape." Dante nodded, but his eyes never left Lena's face. She could feel the weight of his gaze, the unspoken question hanging between them. This was a test. Would she run from the violence? From him? The blood pooling on the hardwood floor should have repulsed her. The casual way he'd taken a life should have terrified her. But as she stood there, watching this man who straddled the line between death and power, she felt something else entirely. A pull, deep in her chest, toward the darkness he embodied. The marble floors of Dante's study echoed under Lena's footsteps as she paced, her hands trembling slightly. The dying sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the room. Dante sat in his leather armchair, watching her with those piercing dark eyes that seemed to see right through her. "No," Lena said firmly, her voice stronger than she felt. "I won't do it." A smile played at the corner of Dante's mouth, but it didn't reach his eyes. Despite his illness, he still commanded the room with an authority that made her skin prickle. He loosened his silk tie, the movement deliberate and measured. "You know," he said, his voice deceptively soft, "in all my years running this family, no one has ever dared to say no to me twice." Lena lifted her chin. "Then perhaps it's time someone did." His chuckle was dark, almost appreciative. "Such fire. It's one of the things I've always admired about you, Lena. But you're making a mistake." "The only mistake was thinking I could work here and maintain any dignity," she shot back, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. "I'm not one of your possessions, Mr. DeLuca." Dante rose from his chair with a grace that belied his condition. Even ill, he moved like a predator. The setting sun cast half his face in shadow as he approached her, and Lena found herself taking an involuntary step backward. "Everything in this house belongs to me," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Every piece of furniture, every painting on these walls, every person who walks these halls." His eyes traced over her face. "Including you." Lena's back hit the bookshelf behind her, the leather-bound volumes pressed against her spine as Dante continued to advance. "I'm not your property," she whispered, but her voice wavered. No? He placed one hand on the shelf beside her head, effectively caging her in. Then why does your heart race when I'm near? Why do you tremble when I touch you? His other hand came up to brush a strand of hair from her face, and she flinched. Your body betrays you, Kara. The pet name sent an unwanted shiver down her spine. Stop it, she managed, turning her face away from his touch. You think you can just walk away? His fingers gripped her chin, forcing her to look at him. That you can return to your simple life after everything you've seen here? Everything you know about me? About my family? The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She knew too much. About his business, his enemies, the blood that stained his hands. She'd seen things while working in this house that could never be unseen. I won't tell anyone anything, she promised, hating how desperate she sounded. Dante's laugh was cruel. Of course you won't. Because you're never leaving, Lena. You're mine, whether you accept it or not. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, the gesture possessive. The only choice you have is whether you come to me willingly, or if I have to make you understand the hard way. Lena's breath caught in her throat. The threat in his words was clear, but so was something else. A dark desire that made her pulse quicken despite her fear. She pressed her hands against his chest, trying to push him away, but he might as well have been made of stone. Please, she whispered, though she wasn't sure what she was begging for. For him to let her go, or to never let her go at all. Dante leaned in closer, his breath hot against her ear. His cologne wrapped around her, expensive and intoxicating. He stood so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, the solid wall of his chest just inches from hers. You'll regret this, he murmured, his lips brushing against her earlobe. One way or another, you'll be mine. The evening air bit at Lena's skin as she rushed down the mansion's stone steps, her heart hammering against her ribs. The manicured gardens stretched before her, a beautiful prison she desperately needed to escape. Her modest bag bounced against her hip with each hurried step, containing the few belongings she'd hastily stuffed inside. The iron gates loomed ahead, their intricate design a mockery of freedom. Two dark SUVs sat parked near the entrance, their engines idling. As she approached, two figures emerged from the shadows, Marco and Antonio, Dante's most trusted. Enforcers. Going somewhere, Miss Moreno? Marco's voice was deceptively gentle, but his eyes were hard as steel. Lena's steps faltered. I need to leave. I can't stay here anymore. Antonio moved to block her path, his massive frame casting a long shadow in the fading light. That's not possible. Mr. DeLuca has made it clear you're to remain on the grounds. You can't keep me here! Lena's voice cracked with desperation. I'm not his prisoner! Marco's laugh was cold and without humor. Look around you, Miss Moreno. Everything you see belongs to the DeLuca family. The roads leading out of here? DeLuca territory. The town below? DeLuca businesses. The police? On DeLuca payroll. Lena's chest tightened as the reality of her situation crashed over her. Her fingers clutched her bag harder, knuckles turning white. Even that little apartment you think you can run back to? Antonio added, the building's owned by one of Mr. DeLuca's shell companies. There's nowhere you can go that he won't find you. Tears pricked at Lena's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. He's dying, she whispered, more to herself than to them. How can he still have so much power? Marco stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. The DeLuca Empire doesn't die with one man, Miss Moreno. And Mr. DeLuca's orders regarding you will be carried out whether he's breathing or not. A chill ran down Lena's spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. She looked past the gates to the twinkling lights of the city below, so close, yet impossibly far away. "Go back inside," Antonio said, not unkindly. "It's getting cold, and you know he'll be asking for you soon." Defeat settled heavy in her stomach as she turned back toward the mansion. Each step up felt like lead in her shoes, the weight of her failed escape attempt pressing down on her shoulders. The grand double doors stood open, warm light spilling out onto the portico, but it felt more like the maw of a beast than a welcome home. Inside, the mansion's opulent interior seemed to mock her. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, priceless art lined the walls, and thick Persian carpets muffled her footsteps. All of it beautiful, all of it part of her cage. She passed a mirror in the hallway and caught her reflection. Pale face, wide eyes, looking every bit like the trapped bird she was. The bag slipped from her shoulder, landing with a soft thud on the carpet. What was the point of even trying to pack? The mansion's silence pressed in around her, broken only by the distant sound of a grandfather clock ticking away the seconds of her imprisonment. Every luxurious inch of this place belonged to Dante DeLuca. And now, so did she. Lena leaned against the wall, letting the cool surface ground her as reality settled in. She couldn't leave. Not now. Not ever. She was as much a part of Dante's empire as the paintings on the walls or the silver in the dining room. His dying request hadn't been a request at all. It had been a command, and she was foolish to think she could defy it. A door creaked somewhere above her, and she knew it was time to face him again. To face the man who held her future in his failing hands, who commanded loyalty even from his deathbed. The thought sent a shiver through her that wasn't entirely from fear. The marble halls of the DeLuca mansion felt different now. Every corner held shadows that seemed to watch Lena's every move. The usual quiet of her morning routine was charged with an electric undercurrent that made her skin prickle. She could feel Dante's presence everywhere, even when he wasn't physically there. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged fresh flowers in the study, knowing he would be there soon. The rich scent of roses filled the air, but it did nothing to calm her nerves. The sound of his approaching footsteps made her freeze, her fingers still wrapped around a stem. "Good morning, Lena." His voice was rough, weaker than before, but still commanding. She didn't turn around. "Good morning, Mr. DeLuca." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. She heard him settle into his leather chair, papers rustling as he began his work. But she felt his eyes on her, burning into her back as she moved about the room. Days passed like this, each moment a delicate dance of avoidance and attraction. When their paths crossed, the air seemed to crackle with tension. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Other times, she found herself studying the strong line of his jaw, the way his hands moved with precise grace despite his illness. During their brief interactions, his touch would linger longer than necessary. A brush of fingers as she handed him his medication, a gentle grasp of her elbow as they passed in the hallway. Each contact sent shivers down her spine, leaving her confused and yearning. The other staff noticed the change. They whispered when they thought she couldn't hear, their words full of warning and pity. "The boss has never looked at anyone the way he looks at her," they'd say. "Poor girl doesn't stand a chance." At night, alone in her room, Lena would lie awake, replaying their encounters. She tried to hate him for trapping her here, for making her feel these things. But there were moments when his facade cracked, showing glimpses of something more human underneath the monster everyone feared. Like when she found him doubled over in pain one afternoon, pride forgotten as he clutched his side. Without thinking, she had rushed to help him, and for a brief moment, he had leaned into her touch, vulnerable and real. As the sun set that evening, casting long shadows through the study windows, Lena went about her usual tasks. The medication tray trembled slightly in her hands as she approached his desk. Dante looked up from his work, his dark eyes finding hers immediately. "You're tired," he observed, his voice softer than usual. "I'm fine," she replied, setting down the tray with practiced precision. But when she turned to leave, his hand caught hers. His touch was warm, gentle, so different from the iron grip she'd felt that first night. She stood frozen, caught between the urge to pull away and the desire to stay. The study was quiet, except for the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Outside, the first stars were appearing in the purple dusk. Dante's thumb traced small circles on her palm, sending tingles up her arm. "I want you to stay," he said, breaking the silence. His voice held none of its usual sharp edges, just a raw honesty that made her heart skip. Lena looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his tanned skin and her pale fingers. She could feel the calluses on his palm, evidence of a life lived violently. This gentleness was a mask, she reminded herself. Underneath was still the man who had threatened her, who kept her prisoner in this gilded cage. But as she met his gaze again, she saw something in his eyes that made her doubt everything she thought she knew about him. There was vulnerability there, a need that went beyond mere desire. For a moment, she glimpsed the lonely man behind the powerful facade, and it terrified her more than his threats ever had. The silk of Lena's dress rustled as she moved through Dante's dimly lit bedroom, her hands trembling slightly as she prepared his evening medications. The curtains were drawn, casting long shadows across the Persian rugs, and the air felt thick with unspoken tension. Dante lay in his massive bed, his muscular frame somehow both intimidating and vulnerable against the dark sheets. "Your fever's getting worse," Lena murmured, pressing her palm to his forehead. The heat radiating from his skin sent a jolt through her system. Even weakened, he exuded raw power. Dante's eyes, dark and intense, locked onto hers. "The medicine isn't working anymore." Lena's throat tightened as she reached for a cool cloth. As she leaned forward to dab his forehead, his scent, expensive cologne mixed with something uniquely male, wrapped around her. Her body betrayed her with a slight shiver. "Cold?" His voice was rough, knowing. "No," she whispered, trying to maintain her professional demeanor. But when his hand caught her wrist, her pulse jumped. "Help me sit up," he commanded, though the order lacked its usual bite. Lena slid her arm behind his broad shoulders, acutely aware of the heat of his skin through his thin shirt. His muscles tensed under her touch, and she had to bite her lip to stay focused. As she helped him up, he leaned heavily against her, his breath hot against her neck. "You smell like jasmine," he murmured, his lips nearly brushing her skin. Lena's breath caught. "Mr. DeLuca, please." "Dante," he corrected, his hand moving to her waist. "Say my name, Lena." The way he said her name made her knees weak. She tried to step back, but his grip tightened. "You need to rest." "What I need," growled, "is you closer." His words sent heat pooling in her stomach. She knew she should pull away, remind him of his weakness, his illness. But her body refused to move. His hand slid up her back, leaving a trail of fire in its wake. "Your heart's racing," he observed, his thumb brushing the pulse point in her neck. Are you afraid of me, little maid?
Yes, she admitted, but they both knew it wasn't fear making her tremble.
Don't lie to me.
His other hand tangled in her hair, forcing her to meet his gaze.
I can feel how your body responds to my touch.
Lena's cheeks burned.
You're sick. You're not thinking clearly.
I've never thought more clearly in my life.
His fingers traced her jawline.
Every time you enter this room, every time you touch me, I want more.
The confession hung heavy in the air. Lena's mind screamed at her to run, but her body melted against him. His illness had stripped away his usual cold facade, revealing something raw and desperate underneath.
This is wrong,
she whispered, even as her hands clutched at his shoulders.
Everything about us is wrong,
he agreed, his voice hoarse with desire.
But that doesn't make it any less real.
A soft whimper escaped her as his fingers traced down her spine. The heat of his fever seemed to seep into her, making her head spin. She knew she should be helping him lie back down, should be maintaining professional distance. Instead, she found herself drowning in his dark gaze. His grip suddenly tightened, and in one fluid motion he pulled her flush against his chest. His lips brushed her ear, sending electricity racing through her veins.
You're mine, Lena. Don't forget that.
The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the mansion's windows when Elena Rizzo swept into the foyer like she owned it. Her designer heels clicked against the marble floor, each step deliberate and calculated. Two of her armed guards flanked her, their presence making the air thick with tension. Lena froze in her tracks, a cleaning cloth still in her hand. She'd heard whispers about Elena Rizzo, the ruthless Mafia princess who'd been circling Dante's empire like a shark scenting blood. "Where is he?" Elena's voice cut through the silence, her red lips curving into a predatory smile. Before Lena could respond, Dante's voice echoed from the top of the grand staircase.
Elena.
His tone was ice cold, despite his weakened state. He descended slowly, each step measured and controlled, refusing to show any sign of his illness. Elena's eyes gleamed. "Dante, darling, you look unwell." "State your business and leave." Dante reached the bottom of the stairs, his presence filling the room despite his pallor. Elena moved closer, her perfume overwhelming. "The other families sent me with an offer. Step down gracefully, hand over control to someone more capable." Her gaze flickered to Lena. "And perhaps less distracted by common help." Dante's jaw tightened. "Get out." "Don't be foolish, Dante." Elena's smile vanished.
You're dying. Everyone knows it. The DeLuca Empire needs strong leadership.
"Like yours?"
Dante's laugh was sharp and cruel.
"The Rizzo family can barely manage their own territory."
Elena's hand shot out, striking toward Dante's face, but he caught her wrist mid-air. His grip must have been painful, but she didn't flinch. That was your first mistake, he growled. Everything happened at once. Elena's guards reached for their weapons, but Dante was faster. He twisted Elena's arm behind her back, using her as a shield while drawing his own gun with his free hand. The sound of the first shot was deafening in the enclosed space. One guard dropped, crimson blooming across his chest. The second guard barely had time to aim before Dante's bullet found him, too. Lena pressed herself against the wall, her heart thundering. She couldn't look away from Dante's face, the cold fury in his eyes, the deadly precision of his movements. This was the man everyone feared, the ruthless Don who'd built his empire on blood and bone. Elena struggled in his grip, but Dante held her easily, pressing the gun to her temple. "Your second mistake," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "was threatening what's mine."
"You're weak," Elena spat. "The families will never—"
"The families will learn what happens when they challenge me." Dante's finger tightened on the trigger. "Consider this your only warning." He shoved her away, watching as she stumbled, her perfect composure finally cracking. Elena's face contorted with rage and humiliation as she backed toward the door.
"This isn't over, Dante," she hissed.
"No," he agreed, his gun still trained on her. "But you'll wish it was." Elena fled, leaving her dead guards behind on the marble floor. The silence that followed was deafening. Dante turned to Lena, his eyes still burning with that dangerous light. Blood had splattered across his white shirt, a stark reminder of what he was capable of. Despite his illness, despite his weakness, he was still lethal. Still the most dangerous man she'd ever known. Lena couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She should have been terrified, should have been disgusted by the violence she'd just witnessed. Instead, she felt something else entirely. A heat that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the raw power he commanded. Dante's gaze locked with hers, and in that moment, something shifted between them. The air crackled with tension, with unspoken possibilities. He took a step toward her, and Lena's world narrowed to just him, this beautiful, dangerous man who could end lives without hesitation, but looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered. The heavy iron doors of Dante's study closed with a resounding thud. Blood stained the expensive Persian carpet. Not his own, but his enemy's. Lena's hands trembled as she pressed a damp cloth to Dante's temple, where a slight cut marred his skin. The adrenaline from the violent encounter still coursed through her veins. "Leave it," he growled, but his voice lacked its usual bite. His shoulders slumped, the weight of the night's events visibly crushing him. "You're hurt," Lena insisted softly, continuing to dab at the wound. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the ticking of an antique clock and their measured breaths. Dante's hand shot up, catching her wrist, but instead of pushing her away, he held on. His touch was gentler than she expected. "Do you know why I became this?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion she'd never heard before. "Why I had to be this monster." Lena stayed silent, afraid to break whatever spell had fallen over him. The moonlight streaming through the tall windows cast shadows across his face, highlighting the vulnerability that had replaced his usual mask of cold indifference. "I was 12 when they came for my family," he continued, his grip tightening slightly on her wrist. "My father, he wasn't cruel like me. He believed in mercy and second chances." A bitter laugh escaped his lips. "That mercy got him killed. Got my mother killed." Lena's heart clenched at the raw pain in his voice. She'd never imagined this side of him existed, this wounded boy beneath the ruthless exterior. "They made me watch," he whispered, his eyes distant with memories. "Made me see what happens to those who show weakness in this world. I swore that day, never again. Never would anyone I care about suffer because I was too soft." His confession hung heavy in the air. Lena found herself sinking to her knees beside his chair, her free hand unconsciously reaching for his. "The illness," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "It's the same thing that took my father. The same weakness in our blood. But he died because he was too kind. I won't make that mistake. I'll die protecting what's mine." The possessive edge in his voice sent a shiver down her spine, but it wasn't entirely from fear anymore. His pain was real, raw, and somehow beautiful in its tragedy. "Sometimes," he said, finally meeting her eyes, "when you look at me with those innocent eyes of yours, I see my mother. She had that same look, like she could see good in anyone, even monsters like me." "You're not," Lena started, but he cut her off with a gentle squeeze of her hand. Don't try to convince me I'm anything but what I am. I've spilled too much blood, broken too many lives." His thumb traced circles on her palm, the tender gesture at odds with his harsh words. "But with you, sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be the man you could love, not just fear." The confession stunned her. Lena stared at him, really seeing him for the first time, not as the fearsome Mafia boss who held her captive, but as a man shaped by loss and pain. His usual walls had crumbled, revealing something achingly human beneath. Her heart raced, but not from fear. This was different, a warmth that spread through her chest, making her question everything. Thought she knew about him. The monster who had threatened and trapped her was also a boy who had lost everything, who had built his empire on the ashes of his innocence. She found herself drawn to him in a way that terrified her, not because of his power or his darkness, but because of his pain, his vulnerability, his unexpected capacity for tenderness. As she looked into his eyes, she saw the flicker of something that could be love beneath all that darkness, and it shook her to her core. The study was silent except for the crackling fireplace, casting dancing shadows across Dante's face. His vulnerability from moments before lingered in the air between them, making the space feel charged with unspoken tension. Lena's hands trembled as she finished applying a fresh bandage to his wound, hyper-aware of his proximity. "Why do you look at me like that?" Dante's voice was rough, barely above a whisper. Lena's fingers stilled on his chest. "Like what?" "Like you see past everything." His hand caught her wrist, his grip firm but gentle. "Past the monster everyone fears." The heat from his skin burned through her, making her pulse race. She tried to step back, but his other hand found her waist, drawing her closer. "Mr. DeLuca, please." "Dante," he corrected, his eyes darkening. "Say my name, Lena." She shook her head, but the motion lacked conviction. His scent surrounded her, expensive cologne mixed with something darker, dangerous. "This isn't appropriate." "Nothing about this is appropriate." His thumb traced circles on her wrist, sending shivers down her spine. "You in my house, caring for me, seeing me weak." His jaw clenched. "Do you know how maddening it is? Having you so close, watching you tend to me with those gentle hands." "I'm just doing my job," she whispered, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. In one fluid motion, despite his injury, Dante pulled her against him. The heat of his bare chest seared through her thin uniform. His breathing was ragged, matching her own erratic heartbeat. "Tell me you don't feel this," he demanded. Before she could respond, his mouth claimed hers. The kiss was desperate, hungry, filled with weeks of pent-up desire. His hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the kiss. Lena gasped against his lips, and he took advantage, his tongue sliding against hers in a way that made her knees weak. She should push him away. She should run. But her body betrayed her, melting into his embrace as if it had been waiting for this moment. His hands roamed her back, pressing her closer,
until there wasn't an inch of space between them. The kiss turned harder, more demanding, and she found herself responding with equal fervor. Dante groaned, the sound vibrating through her. "You taste sweeter than I imagined," he murmured against her lips. "And I've imagined this countless times." His words sparked something in her mind, a reminder of who he was, what he was capable of. The man who had
threatened her, who had killed without hesitation, who ruled his empire with brutal efficiency. The same man who now held her like she was precious, who kissed her like she was air he needed to breathe. The conflicting images clashed in her mind, breaking through the haze of desire. With tremendous effort, Lena planted her hands on his chest and pushed away. Her lips felt swollen, her breath coming in short gasps.
No,
she managed to say, taking another step back.
We can't. I can't.
Dante's eyes were dark with desire, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The predatory look was back, but now it was tinged with something else. Hunger, need, possession. "You can't deny what's between us forever, Lena." She touched her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss. Her whole body hummed with awareness, wanting nothing more than to fall back into his arms. But that way lay danger. Not just physical, but emotional. She was already too close to falling for the man behind the monster. One more step, and she'd be lost completely.
"I have to go,"
she whispered, backing away toward the door. Her hands shook as she smoothed down her uniform, trying to restore some semblance of control. The mansion's hallways always felt different at night. Lena moved silently through them, carrying fresh linens for Dante's room. The marble floors gleamed under the moonlight streaming through tall windows, casting long shadows that made her nervous. But something else made her pause. Voices coming from Dante's study. She shouldn't listen. She knew better. But the urgent tone in the conversation pulled her closer to the heavy oak door, left slightly ajar. "Are you absolutely certain?" Dante's voice was tight with controlled rage. "Yes, boss." It was Marco, Dante's most trusted advisor. "Giovanni's been feeding information to the Russo family for months. The hit wasn't random. They knew exactly when you'd be vulnerable." Lena's hands tightened on the linens. Giovanni was Dante's right-hand man, practically family. She'd seen them together countless times, sharing drinks, discussing business, laughing over old stories. "The bastard's been sitting at my table, eating my food, all while plotting my death." The sound of glass shattering made Lena jump. "How long has he known about my condition?" "From the beginning. He was the first person you told." Lena pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. The betrayal in Dante's voice was raw, something she'd never heard from him before. It made him sound almost human. "He's meeting with the Russos tomorrow night," Marco continued, "at the old warehouse by the docks. They're planning the final hit." "Let them plan." Dante's voice had changed, becoming deadly calm. "I want everything ready. Every exit covered, every escape route blocked. When Giovanni walks into that warehouse, he'll find me waiting instead of his new friends." "Boss, you're not strong enough." "I'm strong enough to kill a traitor." The words came out as a growl.
Lena's fingers trembled as she heard footsteps approaching the door. She quickly moved away, ducking into an alcove. Marco emerged, looking troubled, and hurried down the hallway. Unable to help herself, Lena peered into the study. Dante stood by the window, his silhouette harsh against the night sky. Shattered glass glittered at his feet.
His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. Despite his illness, despite his weakened state, power radiated from him. The kind of power that came from pure, unrestrained fury. He turned suddenly, catching her gaze. "Come in, Lena." She hesitated, but there was no point in pretending she hadn't heard. Stepping carefully over the broken glass, she set the linens aside. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "How much did you hear?" "Everything," she admitted. There was no use lying to him. Dante moved closer, his movements predatory despite his illness. "Then you know what happens to those who betray me." Lena swallowed hard. "You're going to kill him?" "Yes." His hand reached out, fingers brushing her cheek. The touch was gentle, but his eyes were cold. "Does that frighten you, little bird, knowing what I'm capable of?" "You're sick," she whispered. "Let your men handle it." A dark laugh escaped him. "This is personal. Giovanni didn't just betray my business. He betrayed my trust." His fingers tightened slightly on her jaw. "I need to show everyone what happens when they cross me. Even now, even like this, I'm still the most dangerous man in this city." Lena watched as he moved to his desk, pulling out maps and blueprints. His movements were precise, calculated, despite the slight tremor in his hands. He began marking positions, planning the ambush with the same meticulous attention he gave everything else. The cold efficiency of it chilled her. This was the real Dante DeLuca, not the weakened man she'd been caring for, but the ruthless Mafia boss who'd built an empire on blood and fear. She could see it in every line of his body, every sharp gesture as he prepared for tomorrow's violence. Yet something else nagged at her, the pain of betrayal she'd heard in his voice. Even monsters, it seemed, could be wounded by those they trusted. The midnight air wrapped around Lena like a cold shroud as she crept through the mansion's shadowy halls. Her heart thundered in her chest, each beat a reminder of what she'd overheard. The trail, murder plots, and the dark reality of Dante's world closing in. She couldn't stay. Not anymore. She clutched her small bag closer, filled with only essentials. A change of clothes, what little money she had saved. The marble floors seemed to mock her with every careful step, their polished surface reflecting the moonlight streaming through towering windows. "Going somewhere, Miss Moreno?" The voice froze her blood. Marco, one of Dante's most loyal soldiers, emerged from the shadows near the service entrance. His broad frame blocked her path, arms crossed over his chest. The gun, holstered at his side, glinted in warning. I was just getting some fresh air," Lena stammered, taking a step backward. Her palm grew sweaty against the bag's strap. Marco's laugh was hollow. "With a packed bag? Try again." Heavy footsteps approached from behind, and Lena's stomach dropped. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. She could feel Dante's presence like an approaching storm. "Take her to the courtyard," Dante commanded, his voice rough with barely contained fury. "I'll deal with this myself." Marco's grip was firm, but not cruel, as he led her through the mansion's winding halls and out into the moonlit courtyard. The night air carried the scent of roses from the carefully tended gardens, a beautiful facade hiding the darkness within these walls. Dante appeared moments later, his normally immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. Even weakened by illness, He radiated dangerous power, his dark eyes fixed on her with predatory intensity. "After everything," he said, closing the distance between them with measured steps, "you still think you can run from me?" "I heard what they're planning," Lena shot back, finding her voice despite her fear. "Your own people want you dead. How long before I become collateral damage?" "You think I can't protect what's mine?" His words carried a violent promise. He reached for her, fingers grazing her cheek in a touch that was somehow both tender and threatening. "You've seen what I do to those who cross me." Lena jerked away from his touch. "I'm not yours. I never agreed to this. Any of this." "You belonged to me the moment you stepped into this house," Dante growled, closing in until she was trapped between his body and the courtyard wall. The stone was cold against her back, but his presence burned like fire. "Your attempt to leave only proves how much you need my protection. The world out there," he gestured beyond the mansion's walls, "they'll tear you apart." "Better that than watching you tear apart everyone else," she whispered, but her words lacked conviction. The truth was, she'd seen too much of his other side, the vulnerability in quiet moments, the pain behind his eyes when fever took hold. Dante leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. "You think you can leave?" His voice dropped lower, dark and threatening. "You belong to me, Lena. Forever." The word forever echoed in the courtyard, a promise and a prison sentence all at once. Lena felt the fight drain from her body, replaced by the crushing realization that she was bound to this man, to this life, by chains stronger than any physical restraints. His empire, his enemies, his darkness. They had become hers too, whether she wanted them or not. Marco still stood at attention nearby, a silent reminder of the eyes that were always watching, the loyalty that kept Dante's world turning. The night pressed in around them, and Lena could feel the weight of her failed escape attempt settling onto
her shoulders like a heavy cloak. She was trapped in Dante's orbit, caught between fear and fascination, between the monster everyone saw and the man she'd glimpsed in his weakest moments. His hands gripped her arms now, not painfully, but with enough force to remind her of his power, his claim over her. The silk curtains billowed in the night breeze as Lena stood at the window of Dante's study, her fingers tracing patterns on the cold glass. The city lights twinkled below, a deceptively peaceful scene that masked the violence brewing beneath the surface. She could feel Dante's presence behind her, heavy and imposing, even in his weakened state. "They'll strike tonight," he said, his voice rough with illness but still commanding. "Marco's men will try to breach the east gate." Lena's hands trembled as she turned to face him. The moonlight cast harsh shadows across his features, making him look more dangerous than ever. "What do you need me to do?" "Keep watch. Alert my men if you see anything suspicious." He moved closer, and despite his illness, his presence filled the room. "You've proven yourself useful, Lena. Don't disappoint me now." The words stung, but she nodded. What choice did she have? Her failed escape attempt had only tightened his grip on her. Now, she found herself drawn into his dark world of violence and revenge, a willing participant in his schemes. Throughout the night, Lena moved through the mansion like a ghost, checking windows and doors, relaying messages between Dante's men. The weight of her involvement in his criminal world pressed down on her shoulders, but something else tugged at her heart. A growing need to ensure his survival. When gunfire erupted outside, Lena's heart stopped. She rushed to Dante's study, finding him already on his feet, gun in hand despite his weakness. His men moved with practiced efficiency, securing the perimeter. "Stay close to me," he ordered, pulling her behind his desk. The sounds of fighting grew closer, and Lena could smell gunpowder in the air. Through the chaos, she watched Dante direct his men with cold precision. Even sick, he commanded respect and fear. The attack was brutal but brief. Marco's men were no match for Dante's superior strategy. When it was over, bodies littered the grounds. Lena helped tend to the wounded, her hands steady despite the horror she'd witnessed. She caught Dante watching her, something like pride in his dark eyes. Later, as the cleanup began, Dante found her in the kitchen, washing blood from her hands. She felt him before she saw him, that magnetic pull that seemed to grow stronger each day. "You didn't run," he observed, his voice low and intimate in the quiet room. "Where would I go?" Lena asked, but they both knew it was more than that now. She had chosen to stay, to help him, to be part of this violent world. Dante moved behind her, his chest pressing against her back. His hands gripped her waist, turning her to face him. The tenderness in his touch contrasted sharply with the brutality she'd witnessed hours before. "You are learning," he murmured, his breath warm against her skin. "Accepting what you are to me." His words sent shivers down her spine. She should have been repulsed by him, by the violence, by everything he represented. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, craving the dark safety he offered. Blood still stained the cuffs of his shirt as he pulled her closer. His eyes, usually so cold, burned with an intensity that made her breath catch. This was the man who had killed without mercy just hours ago, yet his touch was gentle as he traced her jawline. The attack had worsened his condition. She could see it in the way he held himself, the slight tremor in his hands. Yet he still exuded power and control, especially over her. After another brutal display of violence against his enemies, Dante pulled her into his arms. His lips brushed her forehead, the gesture surprisingly tender. "I'll make sure no one touches you, Lena," he whispered against her skin. "You're mine, and I won't let you go." The silver moonlight filtered through the study's tall windows, casting long shadows across Dante's imposing form. He sat in his leather chair, his usually rigid posture softened by exhaustion. Lena stood at his side, methodically changing his bandages from the earlier confrontation. Her fingers trembled slightly as they brushed against his skin. "You're getting better at this," Dante murmured, his dark eyes following her movements. The intimacy of the moment hung heavy in the air between them. "I've had plenty of practice lately," Lena replied softly, trying to maintain her professional demeanor. But her heart betrayed her, racing whenever his skin touched hers. Dante caught her wrist as she withdrew, his grip gentle but firm. "Look at me, Lena." She hesitated, knowing the danger in meeting his gaze. When she finally looked up, the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Gone was the cold calculation she was used to seeing. Instead, she found raw need and something deeper, a vulnerability that made her chest ache. "Sir, I should—" she started, but her words died as he stood, towering over her. His presence filled the space around her, masculine and overwhelming. "Don't," he whispered, his free hand coming up to cup her face. "Don't run from this anymore." The heat of his palm against her cheek sent shivers down her spine. Lena knew she should pull away, should maintain the walls she'd built so carefully. But her body betrayed her, leaning into his touch. "I'm scared," she admitted,
her voice barely audible. Dante's thumb traced her lower lip, sending sparks of electricity through her body. "I know, but you're safe with me, Lena. You've always been safe with me." The irony of his words wasn't lost on her. This dangerous man, this killer, promising safety. Yet, in that moment, she believed him. His other hand released her wrist to slide around her waist, drawing her closer.
"Tell me to stop," he challenged, his lips hovering inches from hers. "Tell me you don't want this." Lena's hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart thundering beneath her palms. The thin fabric of his shirt did nothing to hide the heat of his skin. She should push him away, should run. Instead, her fingers curled into the material. "I can't," she whispered. The admission broke something in both of them. Dante's mouth claimed hers with a hunger that took her breath away. His kiss was possession itself, demanding, consuming, yet somehow achingly tender. Lena melted against him, her resistance crumbling like sand. His hands roamed her body, leaving trails of fire in their wake. Every touch was a claim, every caress a promise. Lena found herself responding with equal passion, her fingers threading through his dark hair, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "You've haunted my dreams," he confessed, his voice rough with desire. "Every night, every moment. You're all I think about." Lena's heart clenched at his words. She saw the truth of them in his eyes, in the way his hands trembled slightly as they held her. This powerful man, brought to such vulnerability by want of her. Their second kiss was slower, deeper, filled with an intensity that made her knees weak. Dante's arms tightened around her, supporting her weight as she swayed. The solid warmth of his body against hers felt right in a way that terrified her. When they finally separated, Lena felt changed, marked by his touch in ways that went beyond the physical. She looked up at him, seeing both the dangerous Mafia boss and the man who held her with such tenderness. The distinction between the two was blurring, and she wasn't sure if that should frighten or thrill her. Her body hummed with awakened desire, every nerve ending alive and aware of him. She knew, with crushing certainty, that she would never be able to go back to how things were before. This man, this moment, had forever altered her world. "What have you done to me?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. The crystal chandelier trembled, sending prisms of light dancing across the marble floors moments before the explosion shattered the evening silence. The blast rocked the DeLuca mansion's foundations, throwing Lena against the study's oak-paneled walls. Her ears rang as smoke curled through the hallway. "Dante!" The name tore from her throat before she could stop herself. Heavy footsteps thundered through the corridors. Shouts and gunfire erupted from the east wing. The acrid smell of cordite filled her nose as she pushed herself up, her hands shaking. Dante appeared in the doorway, his normally pristine suit covered in plaster dust. Blood trickled from a cut above his eye, but his expression remained eerily calm. His eyes found hers instantly, calculating, assessing. "They're here for me," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. The Rossi family finally made their move. Another explosion rocked the building, closer this time. Lena stumbled, but Dante caught her arm, his grip firm yet gentle. The contrast wasn't lost on her, how he could be so tender with her while violence raged around them. "How many?" she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Enough to make this interesting." A ghost of a smile played at his lips, but his eyes remained cold. He pulled her closer, his breath warm against her ear. "But they won't touch you. I won't let them." Glass shattered somewhere nearby. Automatic weapons fire sprayed across the mansion's facade. Dante's men shouted orders, their voices tight with urgency. He moved with fluid grace, pulling her toward the back of the study. His fingers found a hidden panel behind a painting, revealing a narrow passage. "This leads to the safe room. You'll be protected there."
"I can't leave you."
The words surprised her as much as they seemed to surprise him. Dante's expression softened for a fraction of a second, before hardening again. "This isn't a request, Lena." He pressed a small handgun into her palm. The metal was cold, heavy with promise and threat. "If anyone but me comes through that door, shoot them." The sounds of fighting grew closer. Dante's jaw clenched as he assessed the approaching danger. His hands cupped her face, rough and gentle all at once. "Trust me," he commanded, his eyes boring into hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Lena nodded, unable to look away from his gaze. The man before her was both the ruthless Mafia boss who had trapped her in his world and the dying man who had begged for one night with her. The contradiction made her head spin. He guided her into the passage, his movements precise and controlled despite the chaos erupting around them. The hidden door began to close, but Dante held it for one moment longer. His eyes met hers through the narrowing gap, and in them, she saw something that made her heart stutter. A promise, fierce and unwavering. "Stay alive," she whispered. The door sealed shut with a soft click, leaving her in darkness, broken only by the dim emergency lights lining the passage. Through the thick walls, she could still hear the muffled sounds of gunfire and shouting. Somewhere out there, Dante was fighting, protecting his empire. And her. Lena's fingers tightened around the gun as she made her way down the passage. Each step took her further from him, but she could still feel the ghost of his touch on her skin, the intensity of his gaze branded into her memory. She realized with startling clarity that she was no longer just running from danger. She was praying for his survival. The safe room door loomed before her, solid steel and promise. As she punched in the code Dante had made her memorize weeks ago, she heard his voice in her head. "You're mine, Lena, and I protect what's mine." For the first time since entering his dark world, those words didn't feel like a threat. They felt like a lifeline. The evening air hung heavy with tension as Lena watched Dante methodically check his weapons. His movements were precise, calculated, despite the illness that had been ravaging his body. The study, usually a sanctuary of luxury with its leather chairs and mahogany furnishings, now felt like a war room. "You shouldn't be here," Dante said, not looking up from the gun he was loading. His voice carried that familiar edge of authority, but Lena caught the slight tremor in it, something only she would notice. "I'm not leaving." Lena's hands clenched at her sides. The past weeks had changed everything. She was no longer just the maid who feared him. She was a woman who had seen beneath his armor, who had felt the gentleness of his touch in the dark. Dante's jaw tightened. "This isn't a request, Lena." He finally looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers. "They're coming for blood." The mansion's security system suddenly blared to life, red lights flashing through the windows. Dante moved with surprising speed, grabbing his jacket. Outside, car engines roared and voices shouted commands in Italian. "They're here," he growled, checking his phone. His men were reporting positions, preparing for the siege that was about to begin. Lena's heart hammered in her chest. She knew she should be terrified, and she was,
But something else burned stronger. The need to stay, to protect him, even if it meant facing his demons alongside him. "Dante," she whispered, reaching for his arm. The muscle beneath her fingers was tense, coiled like a spring ready to release. He turned to her, and for a moment, the mask of the ruthless Mafia boss slipped. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. The tenderness of the gesture made her breath catch. "You changed everything," he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought I was dying alone. But you—" He trailed off as gunfire erupted outside. Lena flinched at the sound, but Dante remained steady, his hand still gentle on her face. The contrast was striking, his touch so soft while violence raged around them. "I need you safe," he said, his expression hardening again. "Whatever happens out there." An explosion rocked the mansion, cutting off his words. The windows rattled, and somewhere downstairs, glass shattered. Dante's body moved instinctively, shielding her from any potential debris. His men's voices echoed through the halls, calling out positions and warnings. The attack had begun in earnest. Lena could feel Dante's heartbeat against her chest, strong and steady despite everything. This was the man who had forced her to stay, who had demanded one night from her, who had shown her both the darkest and most tender parts of himself. "I chose this," she said firmly, gripping his shirt. "I chose you." Something flashed in his eyes, pride, possession, and something deeper that made her knees weak. But there was
No time for more words. The sound of fighting grew closer. Dante pulled her toward the hidden panel in the study wall, a secure room she hadn't known existed until now. His movements were urgent but careful, as if she were something precious he couldn't bear to break. The hidden door slid open, revealing a small, fortified space. Dante guided her inside, his hand firm on her shoulder. His eyes burned with intensity as he looked at her one last time. "I'll come back for you, Lena. No one will touch you again." The marble floor beneath Lena's feet vibrated with each explosion that rocked the mansion. Crouched in the hidden panic room behind Dante's study, her heart thundered against her ribs as gunfire erupted outside. The sounds of violence echoed through the walls, shouts, screams, and the devastating percussion of weapons that made her flinch with each blast. Her fingers trembled as she pressed them against the cold wall, trying to steady herself. The last image of Dante haunted her, his jaw set with determination, eyes dark with promised violence, as he'd pushed her into this hiding spot. "Stay here," he'd commanded, his voice brooking no argument. "No matter what you hear." Another explosion rattled the windows, and Lena squeezed her eyes shut. The acrid smell of gunpowder and smoke seeped through the ventilation, making her eyes water. She could hear the heavy boots of men running through the corridors, their voices muffled but urgent. "Find him!" someone shouted from beyond the walls. "The boss wants DeLuca dead by sunrise." Lena's breath caught in her throat. She pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle any sound that might escape. The thought of Dante falling to these men made her chest ache with an intensity that surprised her. When had this dangerous man become so important to her? When had his safety started meaning more than her own? The sound of automatic weapons filled the air again, closer this time. Glass shattered somewhere nearby, probably the floor-to-ceiling windows in Dante's study. She could picture them exploding inward, raining deadly shards across the antique Persian rug she'd cleaned just yesterday. "He's here," a voice called out, followed by the distinctive sound of Dante's preferred weapon, a custom .45 that she'd seen him clean countless times while she worked. 2 shots, then silence.
Time seemed to stretch endlessly as she waited, each second an eternity of uncertainty. The fighting moved through the mansion like a deadly dance, sometimes distant, sometimes terrifyingly close. She could track Dante's movement by the sound of his gun, each shot precise and purposeful, compared to the spray of automatic fire from his enemies. Lena's mind wandered to their last moment together, just hours ago. The way he'd looked at her, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen them, despite the imminent threat. His fingers had traced her cheek with surprising gentleness. "Trust me," he'd whispered, and she'd seen something in
his gaze she'd never expected. Vulnerability. A particularly loud explosion shook dust from the ceiling. Lena covered her head instinctively, her body trembling. She wanted to peek out, to know what was happening, but Dante's orders held her in place. She'd seen enough of his world to know that disobedience now could get them both killed. The fighting intensified, concentrated now in what sounded like the main hall. She could hear Dante's voice, cold and commanding, rising above the chaos. "You thought you could take what's mine?" The words were followed by more gunfire and a scream that cut off abruptly. Minutes passed like hours as the sounds of battle gradually diminished. The gunfire became more sporadic, then ceased entirely. The silence that followed was almost worse than the noise. Heavy, oppressive, full of uncertainty. Lena held her breath, straining to hear any indication of who had emerged victorious. Footsteps approached the study, slow and measured. Lena's heart nearly stopped as they came closer to her hiding spot. She pressed herself against the far wall, even though she knew the panic room was impenetrable. The footsteps paused outside. "Lena." Dante's voice, rough but alive, called out to her. "It's over." Relief flooded through her so intensely that her knees nearly buckled. She pushed the hidden door open with shaking hands and stepped out into the study. The sight that greeted her would have once horrified her. The elegant room was destroyed. Bullets had torn through priceless artwork, and blood stained the imported carpets. But her eyes were drawn only to Dante. He stood in the doorway, his expensive suit torn and bloodied, a gun still gripped in his right hand. Bodies littered the corridor behind him, testament to the violence that had just unfolded. Yet it was the look in his eyes that captured her. Fierce, triumphant, and filled with something that made her breath catch in her throat. The mansion lay in eerie silence after the gunfire ceased. Bodies littered the marble floors, blood seeping into the expensive carpets. Lena emerged from her hiding spot in the wine cellar, her heart thundering against her ribs as she carefully stepped over fallen men. The acrid smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air. She found Dante in his study, standing by the window. His white shirt was splattered with crimson, his knuckles raw and bleeding. When he turned to face her, his eyes held that familiar intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. "It's done," he said, his voice rough. "Come here." Lena approached cautiously, noting how he seemed different now, more controlled, calculated. The weakness from his illness appeared to have vanished entirely. "There's something you need to know," Dante continued, pouring himself a glass of whiskey with steady hands. "Everything that's happened, the assassination attempts, the betrayal, even my illness getting worse, it was all part of my plan." The words hit Lena like a physical blow. She stumbled backward, gripping the edge of his desk for support. "What?" "I knew who the traitor was months ago. Marco wasn't just betraying me. He was working with Elena Rizzo's family to take over my territory." Dante's lip curled in disgust. "I needed to draw them out, make them think I was weak. My illness provided the perfect cover." Lena's mind raced back through the past weeks. Every moment of vulnerability she'd witnessed, every time she'd tended to his wounds.
You used me?
I needed someone they wouldn't suspect. Someone pure. Dante set down his glass and moved toward her with predatory grace. Your presence here, your care for me, it convinced them I was truly failing. They got sloppy, overconfident. Hot tears pricked at Lena's eyes. All those intimate moments, the times she'd seen his supposed weakness, had been calculated moves in his game.
The night you asked me to stay with you.
That was real. Dante cut in sharply. His hand shot out to grasp her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. Everything between us was real. You were the variable I didn't account for, Lena. The one thing I couldn't control. But Lena was already shaking her head, trying to pull away from his touch. The manipulation felt like a knife to her gut.
How can I believe anything you say?
Because I'm not apologizing for it, he growled, backing her against the desk. I would do it all again. Every deception, every manipulation. It kept you safe. It kept my enemies focused on me, instead of discovering what you mean to me. His words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Lena could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the gunpowder and blood on his clothes. Despite her anger, despite feeling used, her traitorous heart still raced at his proximity. Elena Rizzo wanted you dead, Dante continued, his voice dropping lower. She knew what you were becoming to me before I did. If I hadn't played this game perfectly, you would have been her first target. The revelation stunned Lena into silence. She remembered Elena's visits to the mansion, the way the woman had looked at her with barely concealed hatred. It all made sense now. The extra security, the way Dante had kept her close, even while pushing her away. You're the only one who matters now, Dante said, his thumb brushing across her lower lip. Everything I've done, the lies, the deception, it was all to protect what's mine. And you, Lena, are mine. His possessive declaration should have frightened her. Instead, it sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. Here was the truth of him. Not the weakness she'd thought she'd witnessed, but this calculated, dangerous man who would burn the world to keep her safe. I'm not sorry, he repeated, eyes boring into hers with unwavering intensity. I would do anything to keep you safe, Lena. You're the only one who matters now. The mahogany doors of Dante's study crashed open as Lena stormed in, her hands trembling with a mix of fury and betrayal. The room still smelled of gunpowder from the earlier fight, and broken glass littered the Persian rug. Dante stood by his desk, his shirt stained with blood, not his own, as he calmly poured himself a drink.
You used me,
Lena's voice cracked.
All this time, I was just part of your plan.
Dante's dark eyes flickered to her, showing no remorse. I did what was necessary.
Necessary?
She stepped closer, her fear of him momentarily forgotten in her anger.
You let me think I was trapped here, helpless. You manipulated my feelings, made me care for you, while you were plotting behind my back.
The crystal tumbler hit the desk with a sharp crack as Dante set it down. His movements were precise, controlled, but there was something dangerous lurking beneath the surface. Everything I did was to protect what's mine.
I'm not yours,
Lena shot back, even as her heart raced at his words.
You don't own me, Dante. You can't just play with people's lives like this.
He moved then, crossing the space between them with predatory grace. Despite his illness, despite the battle he'd just fought, power radiated from him. His hand caught her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You think I enjoyed watching you tend to me, knowing my enemies were closing in? You think I wanted to put you at risk?" Lena tried to pull away, but his grip was firm.
"Then why? Why drag me into this?"
"Because I needed them to believe I was weak," he growled. "I needed them to think they could get to me through you. And they did exactly what I expected. They showed their hands, revealed their betrayals." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, the gentle touch at odds with his harsh words. "But don't ever think for a moment that what happened between us wasn't real." Tears stung Lena's eyes.
"How can I believe anything you say? You're a killer, a manipulator. Everything about you is dangerous."
"Yes," he agreed, his voice dropping lower. "I am dangerous. I'm violent. I'm everything you should run from." His other hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer. "But I would burn this whole city to the ground to keep you safe." The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. This was the real Dante, not the dying man who'd begged for one night with her, not the calculating boss who'd orchestrated his enemy's downfall. This was the man who'd shown her glimpses of his soul in the dark hours of night, who'd trusted her with his weaknesses.
"You could have told me the truth," she whispered.
"And risk someone seeing through the act? Risk them hurting you to get to me?" His grip tightened possessively. "No. I needed everyone to believe you were just my maid, just another pawn. Because the moment they realized what you really mean to me, you would have become their primary target." Lena's heart thundered in her chest.
"And what do I mean to you?"
Dante's expression darkened with desire and something deeper, something that made her knees weak. "You're everything, Lena. My salvation. My weakness." His lips brushed against her ear. "My queen." She shuddered at his words, at the heat of his breath against her skin. Her hands fisted in his shirt, torn between pushing him away and pulling him closer. "How can I trust you?" "Because every lie I told, every move I made, was to eliminate anyone who could ever harm you." His fingers threaded through her hair, cradling the back of her head. "I won't apologize for protecting what's mine, but I will promise you this. You'll never have to doubt my feelings for you again." The last of Lena's resistance crumbled as she saw the truth in his eyes. This dangerous, violent man had orchestrated everything, not just for survival, but for her. He'd eliminated his enemies, secured his empire, all while ensuring she remained safe. It was twisted, manipulative, and yet completely in line with who he was. Her hand came up to touch his face, feeling the sharp line of his jaw. "You're still a bastard," she whispered. A dark smile curved his lips. "But I'm your bastard." The moonlight filtered through the heavy drapes of Dante's study, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Lena stood before him, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. The events of the past few weeks had changed everything. The violence, the betrayals, the undeniable pull between them. She couldn't ignore it anymore. Dante's dark eyes fixed on her with that familiar intensity that made her breath catch. Even weakened by his illness, he commanded the room with his presence. His broad shoulders were tense,
his jaw set in that determined line she'd come to know so well.
"You manipulated me,"
Lena said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her.
"You used me to get to your enemies."
Yes. His response was immediate, unapologetic. He took a step toward her, and though every instinct told her to back away, she held her ground. I used everything at my disposal to protect what's mine.
"I'm not yours,"
she whispered, but the words lacked conviction. A dangerous smile played at the corners of his mouth. "Aren't you?" He closed the distance between them, his hand coming up to cup her face. His touch was gentle, at odds with the ruthless man she knew him to be. "Every time I touch you, your body betrays you, Lena. Every time I'm near, your pulse races." As if to prove his point, his thumb brushed across her lower lip, and her heart thundered in her chest.
"That's just physical,"
she argued weakly. "No." His voice dropped lower, rougher. "It's more than that. You've seen the worst of me, the violence, the darkness. Yet you're still here."
"Because you won't let me leave."
"Because you don't want to leave." His other hand settled on her waist, drawing her closer. "You've had chances to run, to betray me, but you didn't." Tears pricked at her eyes.
"You're a monster."
Yes. He didn't deny it. His fingers threaded through her hair, cradling them, back of her head.
"I'm the monster who would burn this city to the ground to keep you safe. The monster who dreams of you every night. The monster who's never wanted anything the way I want you."
His words hit her like physical blows, each one cracking the walls she'd built around her heart.
"Dante."
"You're mine, Lena." His forehead pressed against hers, his breath warm on her lips. "And I will fight for you until the end. Whether it's my enemies, this illness, or your own resistance. I'll fight it all." A sob caught in her throat.
"Why me? Why did it have to be me?"
His grip tightened, almost painful in its intensity. "Because you saw past the monster. You looked at me and saw something worth saving, even when I didn't deserve it. You tended my wounds without flinching, watched me kill without running. You're stronger than you know, braver than you believe."
"I'm scared,"
she admitted, her hands finally coming up to grip his shirt.
"Scared of feeling this way about you. Scared of what it means."
"Good." His lips brushed against her temple. "Fear keeps us alive in this world. But don't fear us, Lena. What's between us? It's the only real thing I've known in years." She looked up at him then, really looked at him, past the dangerous exterior, past the manipulation and violence. She saw the man who'd lost everything, who'd built an empire on blood and pain, who now looked at her like she was his salvation.
"If I stay,"
she whispered,
"if I choose this, choose you, what then?"
His dark eyes blazed with promise. "Then I give you everything. My protection, my empire, my life, what's left of it. No more lies between us. No more games." His thumb wiped away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You become my queen, my partner, my reason for fighting until my last breath." The weight of his words settled over her like a cloak. This was it, the moment of truth. She could fight it, deny it, run from it. Or she could accept what she'd known deep down since that first day. She belonged to him, just as surely as he belonged to her. She pressed closer, her body molding to his, and felt his sharp intake of breath.
"Then fight for me,"
she whispered against his lips.
Fight for us.
His response was a kiss that burned through her like wildfire, consuming every last doubt, every hesitation. In that moment, she knew. This was her choice, her destiny. This dangerous, beautiful, terrible world he'd built would be their kingdom, and she would rule it by his side, for however long they had left. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's bulletproof windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Lena stood in Dante's study, her fingers trailing over the mahogany desk where, just days ago, they had fought for their lives. The air still held traces of gunpowder and violence, but something else lingered too. Victory. Dante entered the room, his presence commanding as ever despite the bandages visible beneath his tailored shirt. His dark eyes found hers immediately, magnetic and possessive. The coldness that had once defined him had softened, but only for her. "The last of them have been dealt with," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Victor won't be a problem anymore." Lena nodded, remembering the betrayal that had nearly cost them everything.
"And Elena?"
"Gone." His lips curved into a dangerous smile. "She made her choice when she sided with Victor." Lena moved closer to him, drawn by the quiet strength that radiated from his body. His hand found her waist, pulling her against him with a gentleness that contradicted his ruthless reputation. The touch sent shivers down her spine. How far they'd come from her days as his maid, when she'd feared his very shadow. "You're thinking too hard," Dante murmured, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I can see it in your eyes."
"I'm thinking about how everything has changed," she admitted. "When you first asked me to spend that one night with you, I was terrified. I thought you were a monster."
His chest rumbled with dark amusement. "And now?"
"Now I know you're still dangerous," she said, meeting his gaze. "But you're mine."
The possessiveness in her voice made his eyes darken with desire. He backed her against the desk, his hands gripping the wood on either side of her. "Say it again."
"You're mine," she whispered, more confident now. "Just like I'm yours."
Dante's expression softened, showing that rare vulnerability that only she was allowed to see. "I never thought I'd find someone who could handle this life," he confessed. "Someone who could see past the violence and still choose to stay." Lena reached up, tracing the scar on his jaw, a reminder of the battle they'd survived together.
"You gave me no choice at first, remember? But somewhere along the way, it became my choice. I chose this. I chose you."
He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. The tender gesture contrasted sharply with the brutal man she knew he could be. "I would burn this city to the ground to keep you safe," he promised, his voice rough with emotion.
"I know,"
she said simply, because she did know. She'd seen his ruthlessness firsthand, had witnessed the lengths he would go to protect what was his. But she'd also seen his honor, his loyalty, the way he cared for his people. Dante pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. "The Empire is secure now," he said. "No one will dare challenge us again. Not after what happened to Victor." The mention of his cousin's betrayal still stung, but Lena understood now that in their world, trust had to be earned and kept with blood. She had learned to accept the darkness that came with loving Dante DeLuca.
"What happens now?"
she asked, though she already knew the answer. His lips curved into that dangerous smile she'd grown to love. "Now we build our future. Together." His hand slid to her neck, thumb brushing over her pulse point. "No more hiding, no more running. You're the queen of this empire, Lena."
"My queen."
The words settled over her like a crown, heavy with responsibility, but right. She had earned her place here, not just in his bed, but at his side. She was no longer the innocent maid who had trembled at his presence. She was stronger now, tempered by fire and blood, just like him.
I never thought I'd find peace in chaos,
she admitted, leaning into his touch.
But with you, even the darkness feels like home.
The morning sun continued to rise over the city that now belonged to them both, casting golden light across the study where everything had begun. They had survived betrayal, violence, and death itself to stand here together, stronger for every scar and sacrifice. Lena lifted her face to his, seeing in his eyes the same fierce devotion that burned in her own heart. The DeLuca mansion gleamed in the morning light, its windows reflecting the sunrise like polished diamonds. The air of menace that had once permeated every corner had softened, though not entirely disappeared. After all, this was still the home of the most powerful Mafia boss in the city. Lena stood at the balcony of what was now their shared bedroom, wrapped in a silk robe, watching the gardeners tend to the roses below. The sight made her smile. Such ordinary things happening in a place that had seen so much blood and violence. Her fingers traced the cool marble railing, remembering how different everything had been when she first arrived as a maid. "You're up early," Dante's deep voice came from behind her. His footsteps were silent on the plush carpet, but she could feel his presence, that magnetic pull that had drawn her to him from the beginning. She turned to face him, taking in his appearance. The illness that had once threatened to take him from her was gone, leaving him stronger than ever. His broad shoulders filled out his crisp white shirt, and his dark eyes held that familiar intensity that made her breath catch. "I like watching the sunrise," she said softly. "Everything feels possible in the morning." Dante moved closer, his hand sliding around her waist with casual possession. The touch that had once made her flinch now brought comfort. "Everything is possible," he corrected her. "I own this city, and you own me." Lena leaned into him, inhaling his familiar scent. "The mighty Dante DeLuca, owned by his former maid?" she teased, though they both knew it was true. His grip tightened slightly. "Don't forget who you are now, Gata. You're the queen of this empire." The word queen still felt strange to her. The transition from maid to Mafia boss's wife hadn't been easy. There had been whispers, disapproving glances from the old families, and more than a few challenges to Dante's authority. But he had dealt with them all, showing everyone that his choice was final and his love for her absolute. "Your men have finally stopped watching me like I might steal the silver," she observed, making him chuckle. "They protect what's mine," he said, turning her to face him fully. "And you, Lena, are the most precious thing I own." She raised an eyebrow. "Own?" His smile was predatory, reminiscent of the dangerous man she'd first met. "Own," he confirmed, his hand sliding up to cup her face. "Just as you own every part of me." The morning sun caught the diamond on her finger, sending prisms of light dancing across his face. The ring was heavy, ostentatious, a clear signal to everyone of her position and his claim on her. She'd protested its size at first, but Dante had been insistent. "Let them see," he'd said. "Let them know you're untouchable." "I never thought I'd find peace here," she admitted, looking around at the mansion that had once felt like a prison. "After everything." "After I forced you to stay?" His voice held no remorse. Dante had never apologized for his actions, for demanding that one night, for keeping her trapped until she fell in love with him. It wasn't in his nature to regret taking what he wanted. "After you showed me who you really are," she corrected him. "Both the monster and the man." He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. The gesture was intimate, vulnerable, something only she ever got to see. You're the only one who's ever seen both sides of me, and stayed. The garden below came alive with birdsong, a stark contrast to the nights filled with gunfire and screams that still haunted her memories. But those memories were fading, replaced by new ones. Dante's rare smiles, his gentle touches when they were alone, the fierce protection he offered without hesitation.
"I'll always stay,"
she whispered, and felt his arms tighten around her. Dante's lips brushed against her temple, then her cheek, before finding her mouth in a kiss that held both possession and promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. "You're mine forever, Lena." The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the DeLuca mansion. Lena stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her fingers tracing patterns on the cool glass as she watched the city below come to life. The past few months felt like a lifetime ago. The fear, the violence, the uncertainty all seemed distant now. Behind her, she heard Dante's steady footsteps approaching. Even weakened by his illness, he still moved with the quiet grace of a predator. His reflection appeared beside hers in the window, and she felt the familiar warmth of his presence as he wrapped his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" His voice was soft against her ear, a gentle rumble that made her heart skip. Lena leaned back against his chest, allowing herself to feel the steady beat of his heart.
"Everything. How different things are now. How different I am."
Dante's hands tightened slightly at her waist. "Do you regret it?" She turned in his arms, meeting his dark gaze. The hardness that once dominated his features had softened, but only for her. To the rest of the world, he was still the feared head of the DeLuca family. But here, in these quiet moments, he was simply hers. "No," she whispered, reaching up to trace the scar along his jaw, a reminder of the battles they'd survived together.
"I don't regret any of it."
The mansion was quiet around them, the silence a luxury they'd fought hard to earn. Through the windows, she could see Dante's men patrolling the grounds, a constant reminder that their peace came at a price. But it was a price she'd willingly paid, choosing this life, choosing him, despite everything that had happened. "You've changed everything," Dante murmured, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "This place, my world, me." His voice carried the weight of confession, something he shared with no one else. Lena smiled, remembering the cold, demanding man who had once ordered her to spend a night with him. How far they'd come from that moment of desperation and fear.
"You changed me too,"
she admitted.
"I never thought I'd find strength in darkness."
Dante led her to the leather couch near the fireplace, pulling her down beside him. The morning light caught the silver in his hair, evidence of the stress and battles he'd endured. Yet he'd survived it all. The illness that had threatened to take him, the betrayals, the attempts on his life. And through it all, she'd been there, watching him fight, watching him live. "I remember the first time you defied me," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Standing there, trembling, but refusing to give in. I knew then you were different."
"I was terrified,"
Lena admitted, curling into his side. "But you stayed." His fingers threaded through her hair, gentle despite the strength she knew they possessed. "When everyone else would have run, you stayed." The city sprawled below them, a kingdom that Dante ruled with an iron fist. But here, in this moment, none of that mattered. The violence that had shaped their beginning had transformed into something else, something deeper, more permanent.
"This is home now,"
Lena said softly, watching the play of emotions across his face.
You're home.
Dante's eyes darkened with intensity, the same look that had both frightened and thrilled her from the beginning. But now she understood it for what it was. Love, fierce and uncompromising, wrapped in the armor of a man who'd never expected to feel it. His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing across her bottom lip.
You're mine, Lena,
he whispered, the words both a declaration and a promise. Forever. She leaned into his touch, feeling the familiar surge of warmth and desire that had become as natural as breathing. The man who had once threatened to own her now held her heart, freely given. With a soft kiss, Lena knew that, despite everything, she had found her place by Dante's side. Forever. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.